them to look back and to look ahead. Please now join me in welcoming them first. President Emerita Nan Cohan. She was Want to stand? Stand. As you all know, Nan was president of Duke from 1993 until 2004. She is a political theorist. She was the first and is the only woman to head Duke University. So far. She came here from her alma mater, Wellesley College, where she also served as president. Nan Cohan, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm already very welcome.
President Emeritus Dick Broadhead.
I can't think of it.
I get gun hugs all over the place.
Pretty fun, isn't it?
As you know, he was president of Duke from 2004 until 2017. He is a scholar of American literature. He came to Duke from Yale, where he was dean of Yale College. Dick Broadhead. And someone you know very well, President Vince Price. President Price has been president of Duke since 2017. He came here after serving as provost of the University of Pennsylvania. At Duke, he has introduced initiatives to advance science and technology, to forge meaningful partnerships in the Durham region, to strengthen Duke's campus community, and to address the climate crisis. Vince Price. It is so good to be with the three of you. What a treat this is. Thank you for all that you have meant to Duke in the time that you've been leading Duke and since. When the average tenure today of a college president is 5.9 years, you each have averaged almost double that, and maybe more. Now, I may regret this, but to kick us off, I have to share what my husband said when I told him that I was coming here to interview the leaders of Duke for the past 3 decades. He replied, "Say hi to Coach K."
Fair enough.
That's what you get for marrying a Wake Forest graduate.
I was
You
going to
can
say.
all complain to him in a note. Thank you. It is a privilege to be here with you. And I'm just going to start by asking, and this goes to all three of you. You came to Duke after spending years at another college or university. You were not recruited from within. So my question is, when you came to Duke, this was not a place you were familiar with. What was your sense of what you were getting into? And how did that change after you were here? President Cohan.
My very first reaction was quite physical in ways that have not changed. A university in a forest with wonderful gardens and very beautiful, architecturally distinguished campus, and that remains true. Things that have changed. Well, for one thing, Duke was not yet generally using email in the administration when I came. But Wellesley had been using email. And so I brought my Wellesley email address, and everybody thought that was totally unacceptable. They had to get up to speed. And so we wired the Allen building. And I also remember realizing from the beginning, rightly, that this place cares very much about the Blue Devils. I found that out in 2 ways. First, I spent some time visiting people in their workshops and their offices. I didn't want them to come to me formally. I wanted to see where they worked and how they felt about the place. And so I did a lot of sort of campus touring at the beginning and met fascinating people. And I was so struck by how many people, particularly people who were working in the shops and in the, you know, sort of hardware areas, had Blue Devil posters on their walls. They were very proud to be Blue Devils. But at the same time, the first faculty meeting, the academic council that I attended, the first item on the agenda was, why don't the faculty have more tickets to Cameron? All right? So those things I remember very much. One other thing I would mention is that it was very hard to find your way around because all the buildings seemed to have been just sort of plunked down somewhere.
Right.
I remember when Allison Halton drove me around to begin to introduce, I'd been to Duke, but only to a small part to give a lecture. When she drove me around and I thought, wait a minute, that building's over there, but we were just here, and where did it, yeah. So those were the kinds of impressions I have. But finally, how very warmly welcoming people were, and how nice it was as a Southerner to be back in the South and to feel that. And to be in a place which had not been true in the North as much. There were so many strong, professional, Black members of our community who worked with us both on campus and off. And I also remember thinking, and this is my final point, about how important it was that Duke had had the Women's College. Because it seemed to me that among the co-ed institutions I know, having gone co-ed relatively late, women are sort of almost always, at least for a few years, an afterthought. At Duke, they were not an afterthought. And you felt that from the beginning.
As a graduate of the Women's College, I can appreciate that. Thank you. Dick Broadhead, you came here from Yale. You were not familiar with this place. What had you not understood about Duke that you did realize when you got here?
When I was approached about whether I might be interested in speaking to the committee here, of course, one would be happy to speak to the committee. But you know, I'd only been to Duke once in my life before I became president. And it was rather odd. I was the head of a committee to come and see what had happened to the Duke English department during a famous period of its history. I'm an English professor. I was put up in an odd modern house so far from the campus that no matter how long a walk I took, I couldn't find the campus. And so everything just seemed, this turned out to be the president's house, little did I know. But so like, okay, I was interested, I was open to the idea, but I was by no means pre-sold on it. I was very happy where I was. The things that were so striking to me in the period before, when this was working out, was I read a strategic plan that Duke had created. Most universities are always making strategic plans, but they're all the same as everybody else's. So what's strategic about that? But what was interesting to me about Duke was the plan had very particular things in it, and also funds had been put aside to accomplish these things, which I never saw done anywhere else. And so you thought, this is a place that's serious about the future, serious about diagnosing itself, what the world wants from universities, what we have, what we don't have, and how to get ready to do it. The other thing is, at Yale, I had been to a luncheon where the heads of government of Singapore were trying to find someone to partner with their medical school. They had undergraduate British medical education, and they wanted to create graduate research medical schools for the sake of creating biotech industries and all that that means for a modern economy. They had come to a university I was then employed at, and of course, it was a nice luncheon, but everybody knew from the beginning, there's no way that university was going to do something like that. And then when I came down to Duke, I discovered not only had the same people visited this place, but this place could see the interest of it and could see how with certain precautions put in place, this might be in our interest and well worth our doing. So I came to know this as a adventurous place. Universities generally aren't adventurous. A place that's not change averse, that's future oriented, entrepreneurial. And then, you know, it still wasn't easy at the end, but I can remember on my visit to campus, I was driven through downtown Durham, which in the year 2004 was not a total turn on, if I may admit. But then I remember on the campus, standing pretty near the Allen building, I had heard about Duke Stone, so what? But I looked up and you could just see the stone, the lights of that color of the stone on the library and the chapel. And I date that as a kind of mystical moment when I felt my life might belong here.
And you did, and you did. And Vince Price, 2017, you came to Duke, as we said, University of Pennsylvania. How much time had you been here before that, and what did you expect, and how did Duke surprise you?
So a bit of a commonality with Dick's experience. I'd only been to Duke once before, The Ivy Plus provosts get together on a regular basis, and the then provost at the time, Peter, hosted the Ivy Plus group here at Duke in the Night House. So I stayed at the Washington Duke. We loaded it into a van to go to the meeting. We drove what seemed like a very long distance through a forest.
To a house that looked nothing
marched
like
into this
Duke.
modern house, which was, by that time, entirely empty. I mean, there was almost no furniture in it. It had very luxurious, long pile shag carpeting. And we stayed in a conference room that was almost like a tree house.
Right.
Dick came by and said hello to the group. I don't know that you even remember this, Dick, but so it left me with an interesting impression of the place. But I did have a chance the afternoon before the meeting to walk onto campus and around the West Campus. And who could not be impressed with the beauty of the place? Just extraordinary. And at the end of the meeting, Peter Lang passed around these books on the architectural history of Duke. And it was only through that book I realized there was an East Campus. And read through the history of the institution. And that was my first introduction to Duke. So many things have changed. So many things have not changed. I think that I am the luckiest president in the nation because I came to Duke and I succeeded fabulous presidents and extraordinary decision makers and gave us a platform to do things like the Duke Climate Commitment that are expressing, I think, the sensibilities of the institution in new ways. So that I think has changed. Also, coming back to Nan's commentary about the almost purposeful way in which the campus was designed to confuse people, we have improved wayfinding. And you will see on the buildings on West Campus, we have actually created signs that are visible from the walkways. Because people were wandering around so confused. So in ways large and small, I think Duke is remaining unchanged in those ways that matter most and changing in those ways that the times require.
Judy, I just have to say, since both my successors, my distinguished successors, mentioned the Night House, Bob and I and our family lived there, and we loved it. We thought it was a great place. For example, we could walk out our back door right into Duke Forest and get on one of the trails and cross-country ski. And being in the forest was, to us, very special. So it felt very different if you actually lived there.
You're allowed to have different
Oh,
about
but I did live there.
Oh.
Because when I accepted the presidency, I said to someone, I'm sure there's a president's house, and little did I know, because Keith Brodhead didn't live in the Night House, and actually Terry Seyfried hadn't liked it that much either, so Nan, I was glad you did. It was used as a visitor's house during Keith's time, and that's where I'd been put up. But when I got the job, it turned out that was the house I'd stated was the very house we were going to move into. But that's when the Hart House became vacant, and so we lived there for 6 months and then moved.
Well, it's a lovely, lovely house. And
All right. We're not going to spend
it
the
has
whole
been
time
redone. Gina Marie Washington lived there, and
They made it great. It's a lovely house with no visual connection to the university.
We're not going to spend the whole hour on Night House. I got lots of questions here. Let's dig a little deeper into your time here. Nan, you were here, as we said, from 1993 to 2004. This was a period of great turmoil in our country, the 9/11 attacks, and so much that happened after that. Give us a sense of what you saw. You reflect on your biggest challenges, biggest triumphs. I mean, however you want to try to pin it down.
Well, to start with the challenges, one of the challenges was also, in the end, I think one of the most important steps we took. And I say we throughout here, because remember, we're talking about a team.
That's right.
I had a wonderful set of colleagues who had in each way that they participated, contributed so much to what was possible for us to do. So it's not I did this, it's we. But one of the things we did, which I think was very important, was to deal with an issue that I raised and Vince also referred to, the difficulty of moving around the campus. We built buildings in purposive ways and changed the way the roads were done so that people could get around. But the first thing that I found a challenge, and yet was also in the end an achievement, was the decision to make East Campus a freshman campus, a first-year campus. Glad to hear that. It was a very controversial proposal at first, and when I came and I was just getting to know Duke, somebody told me, okay, well, this is a decision you've got to make right now. Should Duke have an East first-year campus? And I said, wait a minute, I got to get to know the place. But when a year later, I decided, and with a good deal of support, but also some opposition, that it should be. There was a lot of opposition, particularly from some of the students who had big signs around the campus saying that I was ruining Duke and nobody was going to ever want to come. And so it made me feel very good when by the time I left, there was an essay in the Chronicle which included the matter-of-fact statement that, of course, this has always been one of the greatest things about Duke, having an East campus. So that was in the end an accomplishment. Another thing that I loved was I really did enjoy building buildings. It's so much fun to design buildings in all these wonderful different parts of the campus that we remodeled or built. That to me was one of the most important things. Among the challenges, and I'll come back to a couple of achievements, among the challenges, certainly 9/11 itself was a challenge because the campus had included so many people who had known people or alumni who had been affected or who had died. And so making the campus feel brought together in grief, but recognizing our shared support for each other. I mean, it was a time when I felt, in ways I had not, I think, ever before, why the president is potentially a kind of a drawing together factor in the community. And it really was wonderful, but it took a lot out of me. And I remember that both as a hard time, but one that people came together for. Another one of the difficult times was the decision to allow same-sex marriages in the chapel. That wasn't difficult for me on principle. I felt very much that it was the right thing. And one of the things I had done when I came was to extend benefits to same-sex couples, the first institution in North Carolina to have that. And so, it was important. But the issue of the chapel was more complicated because, of course, Duke is a university with roots in and sponsorship by the Methodist Church. And the Methodists had just decided that they would not support same-sex marriages. So the question was the Duke Chapel a Methodist church, or was it a chapel for the whole university with some people enjoying it as Methodists, but many other denominations and faiths? And I took the latter view, and a number of other people did too. The board supported it. I think it was the right decision, but that was not easy. And the last thing I guess that wasn't easy was when we got into the controversy about Duke apparel being manufactured in sweatshops. And it was worried that, in fact, this might be true. And there was a lot of concern about, Students Against Sweatshops was a very active group. And we discovered that there was some evidence that this might, in fact, be true in a couple of instances. And so I was very supportive of that group. But I remember arguing with some of my fellow presidents who said, look, that has nothing to do with research and education, has nothing to do with the university. So why are you saying sweatshops are so important, we must get rid of them, and calling it a university issue? I said, I think it is a university issue. Our people are wearing them. Sorry, they didn't have microphones on where they wore them. Our people are wearing them, and perhaps to some of them I said to myself, although not aloud, it's because you don't have a great athletics tradition that you don't see how very briefly, other accomplishments. I think that it was very important to create some of the academic programs that we created when I was here, not only within certain departments or schools, but the Robertson Scholars, the Kenan Institute, the University Scholars, the Bass Professorships, the John Hope Franklin Center. I think were all important. I mean, we could talk about other things that happened that I thought were great, but I would mention those certainly.
Absolutely, but there's so much more to say, and boiling down, in your case, 11 years, and in your case, Dick Broadhead, 13 years is difficult, but I'm going to ask you the same thing. What, in your mind, when you look back on that time, I mean, we were fully into the 21st century by then. There was a war going on in Afghanistan, later Iraq. We elected our first black president. There was a lot going on.
Well, a lot happens in a week in this world and in this country, and In a university presidency, every week is almost a different world, you know, and you have to administer to constant goals through changing tides. I guess as I look back, I mean, for one thing, the things, I was very lucky to come after Nan's leadership had done, not only thought things up, but actually made them happen. So I meet people who went to Duke before a certain time, and they tell me, we used to sort ourselves out. Was I an East Campus type or a West Campus type? But colleges shouldn't be about people living with their types. They should be about people moving across types, teaching each other, enlivening each other. So that was such a critical thing. And in my time, of course, the issue of central campus was waiting to be solved. The place I was told was neither central nor a campus. When I would come to this campus, we would go to East Campus and West Campus, and I kept wondering as we drove through these ramshackle condominiums from the 70s, why don't they ever take me to Central Campus? And then when I was told that is the Central Campus, I thought, oh, Houston, you got a problem. But we couldn't solve that problem until we had built a lot more housing, and that began in my time, and now you've been able to move on to make, you know, what's the single thing Duke students always said to me was their only regret about Duke, which is they loved the first year experience when they were all together with everybody, and then they sorted themselves out into groups they thought they preferred to live in that were separated in some way or other. And so Duke students in their senior year would have reunions of their freshman dorm. But so like the notion that now you can actually keep the community of the whole together for 4 years is such an important achievement of your time. In my time, when I came, Nan had just completed a very successful campaign that did so many important things. But when I got here, I learned that Duke had great financial aid policies, but only 15% of hundreds of millions of dollars of budget was backed by endowment. At Princeton, it is 100%. At Yale, it had been 79% when I was president there. Yeah. So my first thought was, look, university is America's great luxury, but it's the one thing that shouldn't just be available to people who can pay the price tag. It should be available to everybody who has a hunger for it, everybody who wants to expand their mind and use the expanded mind to build a better world. So I always regarded the question of access as just when I came, that was to me, that was the Duke question par excellence. And so we started the Financial Aid Initiative, and that was about teaching people about the importance of access as well as raising the money. And I remember during the financial crisis, we had a $300 million goal. I remember when the last gift came in on the 7th of October, 2008, when no one knew if there would be a functional economy the next day, but we reached that goal. And then later we raised a lot more for financial aid, and financial aid became more generous. So that was for me such an important thing. I guess the other thing on my list, when I came to Duke, this is a place where people don't think of education as made up of little boxes that you inhabit and do the assigned work. They understand that education is about learning to use your mind in lots of different ways and work with lots of different kinds of people on emerging tasks rather than fixed assignments. So creating the kind of programs that baked that into the identity of Duke academically were very important for me. 𝐾𝐮𝐤𝐞 was an example, the Bass Connections, the work that happened in Pratt. There were many, many. Troubles, well, in the history of America, of course, every decade is going to have its permutations on issues of race and injustice in America. I hear many people speak now as if 2020 was the beginning of the social justice movement of modern years. They must not have been on campus in 2016 for Ferguson, or you can rattle off the years. Campuses are jolted by those things. People have to learn the world, and a lot of people come from places where something hasn't been an issue or hasn't been a problem. And if they, sometimes you have to learn it the hard way on a campus. We have to learn it together. But I think, that those moments were always so alarming until people took a step back. And I mean, I remember the effort to make hate speech be a punishable offense. But of course, it's very hard to square that with free speech. And so we had a student faculty committee, and they came in and actually with the idea that if there's a hate element, it would aggravate a penalty of something that was found to be a violation, but would not itself be treated as a violation. For students to learn that was an important thing. Some other bad stuff happened while I was president, which taught us that we live in a world where falsehoods travel faster than truths, and where people are actually much more interested in repeating falsehoods, even when they have reason to suspect they're false than true. That's always been a feature of society. But the post-IT revolution age has given it new wings, as you know, and the effort, universities are about slowing down and thinking. That's the work of universities. Teach people how to slow down till you understand properly and then move forward. But of course, I had some experience, and I believe that every other living president has had some experience of what it's like to live in a world where the wish to slow down and think is treated as a practically criminal abdication of leadership, right?
Well, you're raising issues I'd love to speak with each one of you about, but slowing down is a hard thing to do. Vince, you've been here since 2017. Tell us how, certainly challenges and certainly things to be proud of. What do you focus on at this moment?
Well, the challenges continue to follow some of the same fault lines that were described earlier. I felt coming to Duke and coming to this part of the South was a tremendous opportunity in higher education, in part because of the history of slavery in the South, the opportunity to reckon with that history. Things are right on the surface, and I had lived in different parts of the country that had managed to convince themselves that that was the distant past.
That's right.
And here, it's hard to believe that that's the case. So it's an opportunity to struggle with those issues when you have a community that's committed to doing right and taking the long road to get there. So the way I think of the challenges, and we've had many, we had a global pandemic. Not an easy thing to navigate through. I'm very, very proud of the way this community, students, faculty, staff, together worked our way through, stayed open throughout the pandemic, had more students actually in residence at Duke than ever before in our history during the pandemic, mounted a major testing program leaning on the resources of the Human Vaccine Institute and colleagues in Duke Health. The challenge of dealing with racial equity that surfaced, it certainly didn't begin in 2020, but it flared up in very significant ways in 2020. The way the community responded here, creating a Racial Equity Advisory Council and committing the whole institution to being serious about leaning into those problems, not to manage through them, but to actually grapple with them. And then most recently, with all of the understandable anxieties about conflicts around the globe, particularly in the Middle East. No campus is perfect, but we have a community that is willing to take the time, is willing to slow down, engage in dialogue. This is very hard to do. I was just at a meeting of college presidents recently, and so many campuses are launching programs to promote civic dialogue because it's not happening. And they were describing the struggles they're having even launching those programs at their campus. One president referred to a protest on their campus where the students who refused to have dialogue were carrying signs that said, "We reject the tyranny of discourse." And that's not a good look for higher education. I don't, but those are the challenges that we face as a nation.
Right.
And again, we have versions of all of those challenges at Duke,
right.
But we do have steady leadership. We have a community that has learned over time from each of these challenges how to work together through them. There is a relatively high degree of trust on this campus between faculty leadership, administrators, students. There is institutional strength at Duke. And I think of all of these events, the way a bank is pressure tested.
That's right.
To see if it can survive catastrophic financial circumstances. We have been pressure tested. Right. And it exposes challenges, but I think we're smart enough as a community dedicated to education, research, and clinical care to step back and learn. So as a learning organization, I think that we're unrivaled as an institution. And not because of anything that my leadership team has done, but over the course of that century, particularly the this represents, what, 30 some odd years of leadership. There has been a tremendous amount of learning that goes on. So we're well positioned to deal with those challenges.
So you raised free expression. What is the definition of speech? What should the definition of free speech on a college campus be? You've raised it, Dick, you raised it. Nan, let me come back to you. How should we think about it right now? So many college campuses in this country have been roiled and worse, as we just heard from Vince, by this. How should we think about this really tough question right now?
I think it's very complicated, not surprisingly, but we have on campus, for everyone involved, faculty and students certainly, and anyone else who's part of the community, academic freedom, particularly of faculty, to say what you really believe to be true, especially within your discipline. But then more broadly, there is the community in which we talk about things that have to do with politics or the purposes of ethics or whatever. I think what's going on right now is a clash between people who believe that free speech is dangerous because it can lead people to say things that are harmful to others, and that the higher priority is for people to feel safe and comfortable.
That's right.
Now, I think that it is not a great idea for people to feel oppressed and threatened as they're educated, because that's not a great climate for education. But on the other hand, education was never designed to be comfortable. Often what makes it work is that it jolts you out of what you think to be true. And in the current situation, I think the fact that the people who are taking positions are taking them on the basis of a very dangerous and horrible conflict some distance away, but one which has many implications for people here on a campus. Because, for example, Jewish students have family in Israel, or pro-Palestinian students are particularly concerned about what's happening in Gaza, and they feel it personally as a wrong. But people see that, and what they really don't have a chance to see is any way in which the other side might have some element of truth or something that they need to think about. And then that leads to protests, which can sometimes be disruptive and sometimes be helpful. So I think speech it's not as clear-cut as, oh, there's a truth and we either pronounce it or we don't. We certainly seek it. But in a world where there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation, we have to be very careful how we shout out things that we believe about, unless we are also willing to give other people the right to do the same, and to do it in ways that do not threaten people's understanding and ability to learn. It's very complex.
It's such an interesting thing. You know, history, it wasn't, more than a couple of centuries ago that any part of the world had such a concept as a legal right to freedom of expression, right? And if you study history, in every country before that and many countries today, we understand, it's the foundation of all the other freedoms that we take for granted in liberal democracies. But universities have a right to it, a commitment to it that isn't the same as the legal commitment to it. Public universities are bound by the First Amendment and private universities aren't. I always found that very strange. But there's a university commitment to it, which is based on the idea universities are about the proposition we don't yet know all about anything. That everything we think we know is that's true until we learn better, until all of a sudden you add one fact to another fact and then it changes it, or you see it from a different perspective and it changes it. And so if you allow a climate where people can take the position, I already know everything there is to know about the subject and you apparently don't, that's the end of that, you have actually stopped the process of education. And so it seems to me that you just have to work very hard on behalf of freedom of expression. Certainly you have to create places where people are comfortable, you have to promote a culture of respect. But the notion that a culture of respect trumps the notion of inquiry and working one's way to fuller and fuller understanding, it seems to me just puts the very fundamental idea of a university at risk.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I agree entirely. Universities are animated by some fundamental tensions, productive tensions. It's a place where the wisdom and experience of age collide with the ambition and enthusiasms of youth. That's a good thing. And there's a learning opportunity for both. It's a place where the best of the past, in a deep conservative sense, we are conservators of history, of culture. We're also places of real change. And it's embedded in our liberal educational, liberal artistic traditions that we be this way. That requires a cultivation of a kind of culture that can disagree vehemently, but in a way that's not necessarily civil, but is respectful and open-minded, to Nan's point. And so when I spoke with the students this year at Convocation, our new first-year students, I suggested to them that the surest way to get things right is to be honest about getting things wrong. And we get things wrong. That's why we're here. We're actually here to get things wrong. Because you believe that as you struggle through wrong answers, you will eventually find the right answers. But that is hard work. And there is a case to be made that dialing up or down the sense of quote-unquote safety on college campuses, it is fundamental to the educational project. On the other hand, education is not exactly conducted through a bullhorn. Yeah. And so how do you create spaces for appropriate protest? We have time, manner, and place restrictions. It should not ever conflict with the core mission of the institution, education, research, or clinical care. And so those are the boundaries that really have to be examined and thought about. And universities will continue to struggle with this. They have to, if we're worthy of being universities.
And especially hard in this time, this moment, when it seems to me there's less tolerance for different points of view than there have been, at least in my adult life. I don't remember a time when politically there's just less tolerance for other points of view.
That's right. Yeah. Right. But if you start from a position of just recognizing humanity in each other, that's the starting point. Yeah. I am proud. One of the things that has changed the last few years, we now have an experiential orientation for every first-year student. And it has, I think, been transformative of student culture in a positive way, because their first encounter with each other as students at Duke is not principally as a student body, but just as a group of people going out and having some project in Durham or hiking on the Appalachian Trail. They meet each other as human beings first, and then we'll introduce the educational project. And it helps to create an environment where people do feel a bit more secure and then willing to suspend unhappiness, disbelief, these kinds of things.
Something else several other things I want to raise with you, but one is, we not only live in a time of less tolerance, there clearly is decreasing respect for our legacy institutions. You can go across the board, government, Supreme Court, you name it, and including colleges and universities, higher education. In this time, you hear critics say, well, colleges are elite. Too many of them they've lost contact, connection, a sense of what the real world is like. They're not in touch with ordinary people. You hear critics on the right saying universities have become too liberal, too progressive. They're hotbeds of movement to the left. How do you think about this? Is there a way to do the job of the university and stay in touch with what ordinary people are thinking and doing and how they're living their lives? And I know that's the purpose of a university, ultimately, is to make lives better. But how do you see that?
Well, it certainly is a time when universities and other institutions are challenged. We're being challenged both, quote, from the left and from the right. Seems to me the challenge from the left is based, as you indicated, on how very costly it is. And there are good reasons for that, but there are also ways in which we could be more careful about that. That's not your question. I don't want to get into it. But the cost and the sense that it's becoming unattainable, as Dick says, that has to be met with many instruments, particularly financial aid. But I think in terms of what you say about being out of touch, it may be that people are just not fully aware of how much folks on campus are involved in the community, involved in doing things, in volunteering, in taking in taking opportunities to be part of Durham. One of the things I didn't mention among the things that happened during my time here was the Duke-Durham Neighborhood Partnership, which I think was one of the most important things that we've done in a long time. Because when I came, there was a real sense that Durham was there and Duke was here, and they were very much isolated. And bridging that gap and having people moving back and forth. If we did that more consciously with the eye to making sure that people understand that what we're doing is part of an education and part of the use of an education, and having more people also act as public intellectuals. So they go out and try to help people understand why what we're doing is important. What is this AI all about? And what are we spending our time doing, and why does it matter to this country, to this community, to this particular part of the world? I think we are perceived as being out of touch. I don't think that we actually are, and we perhaps need to do a better job of raising the visibility of ways in which we are engaged and interwoven with the world and not an ivory tower.
It's such a difficult question. You know, one of the troubles is the increase of financial aid at elite universities has made more people apply to them. 3 or even 4 times more people apply to Duke every year now than applied when I was first president. The numbers are stupefying. But of course, what this means is, since the class doesn't get any bigger, the more desirable these places come, the more people are rejected, and therefore the more exclusive they appear without having, at the moment you're trying to be inclusive or open, in fact you're becoming more exclusive, and so you're perceived. It's a difficult question, partly because things are done in universities that the general public doesn't know or care about. It's actually very important that we do such things. Scientific research, put it on a referendum in your state budget. It's actually not going to pass. Environment, it would be at risk if you put it up. There's just, you know, so it's the function of universities is to protect the work of curiosity in all the different human domains that might someday yield a vaccine, that might someday yield a clean energy source, that might someday yield an understanding of the politics of the Middle East. You know, these are things that come out of universities. Universities do produce public goods, but they aren't always visible as public goods in the short run. I think the more serious question for me was always, you know, the thing that I've been so aware of is nowadays in this country, the people who get into great universities are so smart, they have such extraordinary resumes and gifts, and they spend their time with other people who have exactly that rare quality, and then when they graduate, they move into neighborhoods in New York or formerly San Francisco or wherever, where they live with all people who went to similarly selective universities. You know, a bubble, that's the day I learned the word bubble was the day I learned what we're talking about. To get into the world of elite education is to be admitted to a bubble. It is, and that bubble can last decades in the lives of people. And so a question from my mind was, how do you make education help people understand that they live in a bubble and reach outside it? The creation of Duke 𝐀𝐿 was, from my point of view, you know, 1/4 of the students who were Duke undergraduates had been in Duke 𝐀𝐿 at the time I left here. Duke 𝐀𝐿 was based on 2 premises. You take something you learned here. It's not tourism. It's not even good person tourism, right? The idea was take something you learned in an academic setting and take it out into the world of people who aren't the kind of people you're going to meet in a university, who have problems that aren't homework problems. They aren't problem set problems, and see how you can use your academic education working with people in a community in a strange setting to learn how you can, you know, make a difference somewhere. Remember the very first year of Duke 𝐀𝐿, we got the money amazingly from Melinda Gates and the Duke Foundation. It came in so quickly, we had to launch a pilot program practically overnight. We had 90 students. It was the year of Katrina, and it was the year that Katrina had happened long enough ago that federal emergency funds were about to become unavailable to New Orleans because they couldn't finish the grant applications to get them in time. And so we sent groups of students who would go and live in, you know, decimated parts of New Orleans for the summer. Probably learned a thing or two you didn't learn on the East Campus there. And you know, these people who'd majored in public policy, majored in statistics, they were whizzes, you know, they knew just how to do this kind of thing, but to come back and realize, you know, doing a problem set isn't the same thing as solving a problem. It's a means to solve a problem, but it's not the end. And I think that kind of thing multiplied in many different ways has actually been something that Duke has been particularly strong in.
Yeah. It is, the bubble is a serious problem, And homophily generally in human relationships, it's a problem. We gravitate toward people who are like us. And we're one of the rare institutions in society that go to great lengths to find people who represent all walks of life, bring them together in a residential community.
Right.
How well we leverage that opportunity is open to question. And so a lot of what we've done, you can think of as putting speed bumps in front of people to prevent them from some of their natural tendencies. Right. And it's interesting because we need to bring more rural students to Duke. I'm very proud of the financial aid initiative we launched, focused on North and South Carolina in partnership with the Duke Endowment, because we weren't expressing our commitments to the region all that clearly. But thanks to that initiative, we can honestly say, if you are from a family with a family income of less than $150,000 or less, there is no institution in North or South Carolina less expensive to you or your family than Duke. In fact, it's probably more like $200,000 of family income. That's not a message that people in this region actually believe.
That's right.
You have to carry that message out. You have to get out of your rut. You cannot go to the same schools. You have to think differently. Right. We're in the human talent identification and development business.
Exactly right.
You get any institution gets a little lazy. You have to get out of that bubble. Our bubble, as well as the bubble our students or our faculty might find themselves in. And higher ed in general needs to do more of that. We have increased, the socioeconomic diversity at Duke has not been what it ought to be. And over the last 2 years, we've increased the percentage of new students who come from families eligible for Pell Grants, the roughly $65,000 of family income, from around 11% to this year, 22% of the entering class. Principally through financial aid, but also through better communication that we want you at Duke. We exist for students just like you. And so it doesn't happen right away, but I like the disposition of the institution. We have to be plain spoken. We are perceived as elite. We are elite in the sense that we aspire to excellence and we're able to do all of those things, but it should never translate into a behavior that not intentionally but unintentionally is off-putting. And higher ed generally has issues there that maybe are not entirely of our own making, but perhaps partially of our own making.
That's right.
But they're certainly being capitalized on by people who do not have, in my view, good intentions.
But often they have very good educations.
Yes, this is true. This is very true.
Well, one other question in connection with this, and I do at the end of this conversation want to bring us back specifically to Duke, because it is the centennial. But on this, and Nan, you raised it, the cost of higher education, tough question. Vince, you and Dick have spoken about initiatives to try to make Duke available to more people who don't have, multi-hundreds of thousands of dollars in family income. But how do we think about that? And in connection with that, I guess I call it one of those 30,000-foot questions. Have we as a country put too much, not enough emphasis on the value of technical education and vocational education? Have we somehow, in celebrating the work that you all do, which is so important, and that Duke and so many other schools are doing, have we somehow not celebrated enough the work that is done, again, in a technical, vocational
You want somebody
place?
Sorry.
I think that we have. The college for all concept is problematic. Education for all, absolutely. Professional preparation for all, absolutely. But the idea that college as defined by a place like Duke is for everybody, it's not clear to me that it is necessarily, right. or when it's appropriate.
That's right.
So I think the glory of the U.S. educational system is that it has been patched together with very different institutions with different reasons for existing, very different curricula, serving different student needs, thinking carefully about how the supply and demand of higher education ought to be navigated is hard work. And I think it has become simplified into a certain amount of sloganeering. And it doesn't serve institutions well who aspire to, I think of the liberal arts as the skills, I don't think of it this way, they are the skills required of a person to live a good life in a free society. That is the definition of the liberal arts. There are a lot of technical skills wrapped up in the liberal arts. So it's not like liberal arts isn't a technical education, it oftentimes is. But I think we've underinvested in all kinds of programs that would create more economic mobility for people and a ladder that they could ascend, perhaps over time, and not by the time they're 18 or 20 years old, perhaps. That's hard work. That's hard work. And you could double, triple the student bodies at places like Duke. You would not start to address that problem much at all.
I think you said it just right. But one of the troubles we have in this country is that we've allowed people to talk down education in all its forms without talking it up. It seems to me, I completely agree that liberal arts, the education of the sort that is practiced in my former life at Yale or in my later life at Duke, is not perhaps for everybody, and certainly not at the age of 18. But I also think that nationally we have sort of underexpressed the value of that education. It's not about taking one science class and one literature class. It's about learning to activate different parts of your mind and become a versatile person who can match intelligence with quickly arising challenges. But colleges haven't given off that message as fully as they should have. At the same time, when I came to Durham, I knew nothing about the community college system of Connecticut, but when I came here, I learned right away about Durham Tech, which was one of the most highly regarded community colleges in the country, headed by the beloved Fail Wynn, who came from there to head the Duke-Durham Neighborhood Partnership in my time. And of course, what they did, when employers would come to the Triangle, they would go and meet with Fail Wynn. He would go with them and find out, if you were to decide to move here, what kind of workforce do you need and what do they need to know? And then they would figure out, how can we teach that and other things. I gave a poetry reading at Durham Tech once, and 400 people came to it. So it's not like they learned to do some narrow practical thing with that was part of the education of which there was more. And I think that all the parts. You know that in our country, political differences now track onto the difference of educated, not college educated, to a degree that was not true even 10 years ago. This is a very, very dangerous phenomenon. But in such a world, every part of education has to be spoken of positively, ambitiously, and I think Vince has it just right, as if it's part of the opening of the door to human fulfillment.
I don't really have anything to add.
So in the time that we have left, I want to hear from each one of you. I mean, here we are celebrating 100 years, Duke Centennial. What is it what are your greatest fears and what are your greatest hopes for this university for its next 100? Or if you want to limit it to the next 50.
1,000?
How do you think about the future?
I always had one fear about Duke. I don't have a lot of fear about Duke at all. What my hope for Duke is that Duke has features that other great universities don't have. It is a naturally collaborative place. When I first came here, the first meeting I went to, Peter Lang led a meeting of the deans. They all knew each other. They knew each other's challenges. They were trying to figure out how could something that's good for you also be good for me. I'd been a dean for 11 years, and I'd been to lots of deans meetings, but the deans didn't know each other's schools. They didn't work together like that. So a place that has a culture of collaboration, a culture, a collegial culture, a family culture, you might say, that nevertheless works strategically to try to figure out not just what will make us cool, but what will make us do the things that universities uniquely can do for individuals in their world. Duke has special strengths for that, and so what I've always hoped for Duke is that it doesn't make it its business to become like some other school that lacks the very thing that makes it itself.
Mm-hmm. So, right. Yeah. So in terms of hopes, somebody I wish were here to help us answer this is Terry Sanford, who had wonderful visions for Duke. And as many of you know, he coined the phrase outrageous ambitions, which so well fits Duke. So here we are, decades later. We still have outrageous ambitions, and I think continuing to do that is something I hope will always be true for Duke. I remember when I came here, having spent a lot of time at Stanford, I thought that there were some similarities. This is not to say that we should be Stanford. I don't believe that at all. But there were some similarities between Duke and Stanford. A fine regional university that was becoming increasingly national and even international in scope. And that Stanford was a little further along the trajectory, but Duke was moving fast and were very ambitious. And so I think that's still a good sort of image, leaving Stanford aside, that we're moving along that kind of trajectory from regional to national to international and with a much broader scope. But then the question arises, so what happens when we get there? When we become more global and more international, do we still retain our regional roots, which I think are very important to the character of Duke, and I hope we never lose them, but we also have to be open to what it means to be a truly global university, and how will that feel and how will we lead in that way? I'm quite optimistic about Duke being able to move into the next stage of the trajectory very successfully. But I hope that we don't lose sight of the history that we're celebrating with this centennial, because it's very important to the character of what this place is, the Bassett Affair and the other ways in which this university has stood up and stood out across the centuries. And I hope will, because there is, after all, as a college, we're more than 100 years old, and I hope that will always be true. In terms of fears, I don't know Duke well enough today to know exactly what one should fear. And like Dick, I don't think first of fears for Duke's future. I'm sure there are some pitfalls that we should avoid, but I'm not sure that I see any that are so peculiar to Duke that we should try to avoid them without learning from the instances of other universities who have moved in basically the same directions, and making sure we hold fast to our principles and to our commitment to the love of truth and the ways in which this university embodies the eruditio et religio in the fullest sense of the word, as William Preston Few would have said, where it's not just erudition and religion, but it's spirit and reason and hope and faith and trust, but also solutions that are rooted in practicality. And Duke is very good at combining those apparently disparate things, and I just hope we always will be.
So. Fears, concerns, hopes.
So my fears are not particular to Duke. They're more about higher education generally. And there are a lot of things that challenge the models, the financial models that have supported higher education, the ability for public and private partnerships to lift the whole enterprise, the broad public support that institutions of higher learning have enjoyed. All of those things are at some risk right now. There's nothing about Duke in particular that makes me incredibly nervous, but and in some ways, I think when you're facing headwinds, you're distinguished by your ability, and I'm not a sailor, but you can sail into headwinds if you tack appropriately. And this institution is capable of doing that. More capable, I think, than most institutions, maybe than any. In terms of my hopes for Duke, I would echo what's been said. The way I think of this is, we are an ambitious institution. Terry gave us that phrase, outrageous ambition, and it's a gift to Duke University. Well, Terry was a gift to Duke University in so many ways. But that phrase is a gift to Duke University because it's understood not as just ambition, but the desire to do things in a Duke way. It is not targeted toward imitating anywhere else or anybody else. Just do it the Duke way. And that's a powerful thing. The other thing that Duke has that I've come to recognize and value, maybe over anything right now, is we are a deeply optimistic place. Optimism is in very short supply. The world is saddled right now with an excess of judgmentalism and cynicism.
Right.
This is not a cynical place.
That's right.
I love that about Duke.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a corny, ostrich in the sand cynicism. It's an engaged optimism that drives the place. I think that our youth is expressed in a lot of different ways, but so many institutions right now, I think as they reflect on where they are, they probably feel maybe their best days are behind them. No one in this room, I think, feels that Duke's best days are behind us.
Amen.
Our best days are absolutely in front of us. So you could, so that's not only my hope, it's my expectation for Duke. Outrageous ambition and a deep enthusiasm for the future.
How fortunate is Duke University to have had these three extraordinary leaders over the last 30 years.
Such distinguished alumni.
Judy, would you allow me to say one word? So I used to go to China a lot, and in China, if you thank anybody for doing anything, they often say, "It was my honor." And actually, it's not a phrase I ever used. I don't know people who use it in this country, but to have been asked to be the president of this university is our honor. And there's another thing that people in this room may not know, which is the transition from one university leader to another is not guaranteed to be a successful one historically. Often strong leaders are followed by people who are chosen not to be so strong. Often they resent the people who come afterward. There's many ways it can go wrong. When I came to this place, you welcomed me with open arms. You and I ran side by side for 6 months. You were so helpful to me in every way, and then you let me alone. And I remember, well, you did it. You had 4 kids. You already had some practice. But I can remember meeting Vince in a hotel in New York. We had never met. It was the Sunday before the election in 2016, and we had an hour or an hour and a half together. And I tried to be as helpful to you as I could. And since then, I mean, I just think that the collegiality of this university, as it has passed from decade to decade to decade, is something that I don't see how anybody in the room would know about it, but it is something very striking to me, and for which I myself am very grateful.
Yes.
Well, very good, Dick.
It is an honor.
It's an honor.
This is a good place to say it.
As I was saying, how lucky is Duke? And thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
You all were great.
Well, I want to make sure the mics are off. Along these lines, at my inauguration.
Thanks for attending. Please join us for a reception in Schaefer Mall in the Bryan Center.